say? There are not a few of these giant trees. The remnants are everywhere. Our eyes only allow us to see small glimpses of what was. But the more your eyes open, the more you realize that these ancient trees were everywhere. You see, we have been told to dismiss what our eyes have told us for so long. Erasing all truths of the old world is a vast and extensive lie that branches off into all facets of our life. The lies are numerous, and the reason for it is quite simple. Those unaware of their true past, of their true capabilities and origins, are all that much more easier to control. It's not just about giant trees, though the giant trees for me and many others were a big eye-opener to the true beauty of this world.
Who can take your money? Who can take your money? With a twinkle in their eye. A twinkle in their eye. Take it all away and give it to some other guy. The government. The government can. And who can tax the sunrise? Who can tax the trees? Well, let you run a business and collect up all the fees. The government. Oh, the government can. The government can. And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good. The government takes everything we make to pay for all of their solutions, like healthcare, climate change, pollution. Just throw away the Constitution. I wrote that, thank you. Who can give a bailout? Tell us to behave. And make the founding fathers roll over in their grave. I don't care if you hate me, I'm going to sing it anyway. Oh, the government can.
Are you the king of the Jews?
My kingdom is not of this world.
So you are a king then?
You say that I am. I was born and came into this world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me.
Truth. What is truth?
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Yeah.
Podcast for the curious mind. I don't know what that means.
Broadcasting live from a Chinese-made microphone deep within the Valley of the Buffalo. I am cussing with Hussing with my co-host, Constant Mayhem.
Howdy.
We have a special guest today. JT follows JC. Please welcome JT to the show. JT, thanks so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it. Now I played that Pontius Pilate clip before we started our intro because I at times identify with Pontius Pilate. And that is what is truth. And I've seen a bunch of different people, describe the context of how he was saying it, but it's something that rings true, I think, to a lot of people, especially when we start to find out, when we had Chris from Old World Exploration on a few weeks ago talking about the old world and some of these structures that were built supposedly in populations of 5 to 10,000 people, and it just it doesn't make any sense. You start to see the world a little differently. You start to question things you were told. When did this journey start for you, I guess? I'm gonna do a little housekeeping here, JT. There's people saying on your channel they can't hear
Audio.
dead audio over
Let me
there.
try the mic on here. Okay, can you guys let's see.
Give that a test.
Hello, can you guys hear now?
We'll let it ride for a minute. See if you can get. Oh, I got to thank you.
We
hey.
good?
All right. Well, we just covered the most important part of the show. So
Figure out how to lip read.
yeah. And for any,
we're good. We're good now.
Sounds like everyone can hear you.
Hey guys. Hey, full disclosure, I'm streaming from another podcast to mine. So yeah, like I guess that I thought that if I put my mic on, I thought my mic was going to go through StreamYard, but I guess I should have realized it.
Well, it's a learning curve for everyone.
So I'll go back to what I said. I'll say that yes, I grew up in a Christian home, and a lot of people who follow me already understand my testimony in that I grew up Christian. I believe Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life early on. And then at some point I kind of had to decide if I believed that. I did. But mostly I was a lukewarm Christian. I was somebody who believed but didn't really walk it. You know, I was like what James talks about. I look in a mirror and I forget who I was when I walk out the door because I'm trying to basically just like do well enough to not go to hell, but really not actually say like, do I really care about treasures in heaven? I'll be happy to be a pauper in heaven. It's just like, I just don't want to go to the bad place. And then I said, I went through 2020, all the turmoil of the pandemic, the election nonsense. And I felt like living on Twitter that year, no one cares what's true. And then eventually I went through a divorce and I was like, man, I can't trust anyone now. And then praise God, I brought me to my knees and I prayed to him and I said, I really don't care what happens next as long as I'm okay with you. And that's been my journey ever since then. And like, it was kind of like the difference between knowing and understanding. So I knew what was true before, but I really didn't understand why it was true. And I didn't realize why it was so important. Like I think like a lot of people are taught that salvation is like fire insurance. Well, you need that insurance because something bad is going to happen one day. You will die. And so like you want to go to heaven. But then I realized in a low place in my life, I needed Jesus now. I could not wait for, death. And at that point, like God started revealing things to me as I started to understand that, hey, this system is not what we're taught. There's something off and everyone knows it. And then as God slowly started to reveal things to me, I felt the need to like speak about it. And then that's eventually how I got to TikTok and YouTube and all the other apps.
It seems like so interesting because everyone I've talked to about the old world, the little season or short season, however you prefer to describe that, all of this starts around 2020, and I think it's so what a way to backfire on shutting everyone into their homes. It really brought out a lot of people, and it made people comfortable to actually, put a little time, do a little research, and all of these, great little tidbits of information are coming out now where, at 2019, it just felt like everyone was still sort of blindfolded to what was going on. And it's also interesting too, like, he mentions like, it always seems like when there's chaos going on, if you can work your way through that chaos, it's really like a new enlightening that comes forth from it afterwards. When you started studying into this, you were raised traditional Christian, whatever that means, I guess.
Well, I went to a non-denominational church, but I went to Baptist school, so I've seen more than one kind of denomination. So like I kind of have been through it.
Baptists are very huge into the King James version. Am I correct on understanding that?
I would say that, of course, so it's going to offend somebody, but I don't really care. Baptists, from my perspective, Baptists were kind of like, they were pretty legalistic, and yeah, they had certain traditions that were we're obviously not to the level of like Catholicism and religious practices, but I remember like they beat by beat, and it was very more like, here's the rules, and we're going to punish you when you break them. Even though, like, like the love would say, we know you're going to break them, but we want you to understand why you did wrong. I remember like going through like Baptist schools, it was always felt like not quite to the level where like the nuns are about to smack your wrist with the ruler, but like
It's
sort of like you're going to be punished when you do what's wrong.
more
even though, like,
emotional damage.
well,
Yeah.
what's the funny part about that is, as probably our sin nature and our human nature is like that, because something's wrong, it makes you want to do it more, because this is like something you're not supposed to do. Because like, so it's like the more they try to tighten down on you, the more you want to rebel against that. When like love would actually say, hey, it's not the best way. Like, just, you don't have to do it that way. This is a better way. And I think that's like that. I think that's something they lack. But yeah, the KJV, they prophesy in KJV. Or actually, I don't think they do that. I don't think the fruits are still valid. I'm not sure. But you ever heard there was church where they only prophesy with "thou sayest," and all the other old English terms.
Yeah, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and
Okay.
I remember that it was. I remember I had a sit-down discussion with a Baptist where we both brought our Bibles and discussed the Trinity, and it went for like 2 hours, and I was like 14 at the time, and he was so red in his face, and it was the only person that, like, it was just, there was an impasse. There was just a agreement to impasse. He was very, he believed what he believed, and I respect that. I do. People, they choose to believe what they want to believe, but you growing up in that legalistic type of mindset, when do you start, looking into, the 1,000-year reign already being taken care of, all of this? When does this start to become part of your study?
6 months ago.
There we go.
I mean, it's something that's very recent. Obviously, until I started to put myself out there on like TikTok and the other social media apps, I never even heard that Jesus already came back. Like that was something that's not.
Right.
I never even knew anyone thought that. It's funny you say Jehovah's Witnesses. Don't they believe he came back in like 1919 or something like that?
1914.
1914.
Yes.
Okay, I knew it was something about that.
1914. Yep. That's their. So when I heard, you see, Chris said it in passing a couple weeks ago about this, the 1,000-year reign already happening. When I heard that, I was like, man, it made a lot more sense as why these beautiful structures have been all covered up and destroyed and decapitated and so on and so forth. So I and I saw you had just started a podcast where you want to focus solely on that.
Mhm.
That's why we're having you, and that's why we wanted to have you on, because you've been doing the research on
Well,
this.
yeah. So when I first got on social media, my very first like kind of like hit TikTok was I had a little series of basically like the Bible, the book of Revelation is playing out right before our eyes. And I was showing like news headlines, and I was kind of like, it was funny, I was doing these kind of goofy skits. So I was like, so that's kind of what woke me up as somebody going to Christian schools. It was like the Left Behind movies, and like, oh, they're going to put some microchip in your hand, it's the mark of the beast and all that stuff. So like everyone who has any kind of knowledge of that can see that looks like it's, there's been this march toward that. The technology is there. The governments of the world look like the borders are obviously fading. They look like we look like we're leading to a one world government, a one world currency, a religion that is inclusive to everyone. And wow, that sounds like all the things that Left Behind was talking about, right? And so I started to do videos about that. Meanwhile, while I'm doing that, I'm still looking to every conspiracy, because now I'm a TikToker, and it's like, oh, you want to get like 1 million views, so like you got like, let's look into everything.
Yep.
Well, I mean, so like obviously, like when they did some video about like Bill Gates talking about electronic tattoos. Okay, well, obviously I'm focusing on the book of Revelation then. But if they weren't, I was saying, hey, look at this cartoon that's showing you all this Illuminati stuff. And that's kind of like what I did. And I'm a movie guy. I've watched a bunch of movies when I was a kid. I liked comic books. So I started to make videos about all those kind of things. So I was a person who probably talked about lots of things, but I had a focus that was based on the Bible. And then so when somebody told me at once, when I probably one of my end times videos, they said Jesus already came back, and I was like, what? Why would you think that? Like, why could you possibly think that? Because we've been all taught a certain way of like, when he comes back, it'll be like this.
It almost is like heresy to utter such a thing.
Well, I mean, I've been called a heretic a lot lately, but I mean, yeah, but that's what they would try to say, is that if you believe he came back, then you it's kind of weird when you think about it. If you believe he came back, then you're not a Christian. It's like, but
Yeah.
why? Like, why? Because some people have put their hope in that specific thing, is that's what makes you Christian, when it's like God's grace, faith in Jesus, obviously understanding that God's not going to ban you no matter what. I mean, like, there's different points in, like, obviously the Bible it's a long history lesson too, about like that the people had faith in God before Jesus, they're going to heaven too, right? So like the people after that are going, if they believe in Jesus, you're going to heaven, right? That's biblically. So if you're preaching, I believe all the things about the cross, but I also believe he came back before, why would that make you a heretic?
Now, when we talk about short season, little season, I don't want to like leave people behind on our side of the audience. What are we talking about when we say that? What is the short season? What does that mean?
Okay, what it really means is in Revelation chapter 20. We'll start with Revelation chapter 19. Revelation 19 talks about Jesus coming back and fighting the battle of Armageddon. And then so after the battle of Armageddon, basically there's the wine press. Obviously that's when everyone's getting cut to pieces. People are getting fed to the birds. And after his enemies are defeated, he like resurrects his saints, and they reign with him for 1,000 years. Well, before that, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire. But here's the thing, and I think if you have not looked into this, you should. For some reason, God decided not to throw the devil into the lake of fire, but he was bound and he was put in the bottomless pit. And then, so it's what it says so the devil was not allowed to deceive the nations again for 1,000 years. But after the 1,000 years was over, he was allowed to come out for a short season or a little season to once again deceive the nations. And then he was going to gather them, Gog and Magog, and they were going to fight against Jesus in the camp of the saints.
What would be the purpose of God releasing the devil after the 1,000 years?
That's a great question. And I've wondered that, and I thought about it like this. Okay, let's just say what the mainstream churches teach us is true, that God, Jesus himself, is reigning from the modern day Jerusalem, the place we know as Jerusalem, right? We have a king that's over the whole world. Okay, let's just say people are still living and dying during the millennial reign. I think some people have it twisted. They think that like the millennial reign is like heaven. It's not. There's the saints who are resurrected or reigning with Jesus, and there's still other people, because not everyone dies in the book of Revelation. I think that's a thing that people need to probably understand a little more. The end of the world is not necessarily the earth is destroyed. It's not like a comet hits it. It'd be like the world as you know it is changed, right? Like this, the end of our world as we see it. And so you imagine if you were born after all that stuff had happened, and now you have a king over here. Well, he's a good king, but he's got a bunch of rules, and you don't want to follow the rules. Well, isn't that kind of the opposite of faith, right? And so if we're saved by God's grace through faith, we believe in an invisible God, basically, that we cannot see, and we have to be good based on how we, even when we don't want to, it's kind of like it's your heart, right? So if I told you all the right things to do, and even if you knew they were right, you still would kind of resist that a little bit. So I think that part of it is like that, again, once it comes down to free will again, that if the devil is giving you another option, and if God's people are going to choose him because they know what's right, because they love him and choose him, not because they're forced. Which obviously, if you have a king, whether he's a good king or not, like I said, like I was saying, the Baptist school, our natural instinct is to rebel, even if they're telling you what's right.
So now, traditional Christianity, they teach that Christ dies, he's resurrected, and then there is a period of time before he is to come back, and this is the second coming.
Mhm.
I could be slaughtering how I understand this, but and correct me if I'm wrong. But so Christ comes back sometime in the future, and it all happens, during this whole, great tribulation time of the end,
Mhm.
the Megiddo, Gog and Magog, all of those things happen in the Middle East, and then Christ comes, and the day of judgment happens, and then his 1,000-year reign starts.
Mhm.
So for the majority, I would say, like, for 99% of Christianity, or people who profess to be Christians, to large, traditional churches, this is how they see the second coming, right? And then they believe they'll be raptured. Some of these believe they'll be raptured before this great tribulation even starts.
Mhm.
Now, I had an uncle, and he told me, he's like, listen, if you don't hear from me, you're more than welcome to hide out in the cabin up in northern Minnesota. I'm not kidding you. So first of all, thanks, Ron, for knowing I'm not getting raptured. Appreciate that. Now, what you're saying, though, is that Christ dies, is resurrected, and then when does he return?
He returns in the generation of the apostles. And once you see this, I'm telling you, once you're willing to accept this, you will see this and you will not be able to deny it, because here's where a lot of people get the 7-year tribulation from. They get it from the Daniel 70 weeks. So,
Yes.
so Daniel has a 70-week prophecy, which is 70 weeks are literally like they're periods of 7 years. So 70 times 7, 490 years. And so what it says in the prophecy of Daniel is, when the decree to build the temple starts, that's when the 70 weeks starts. Now, what's interesting about Daniel, and I think a lot of here's where the people who believe in the future prophecies really fall short, and they don't mention this. Gabriel is telling Daniel kind of all these things. He's Daniel's praying about his people being in captivity. That's what happened. Like, that's Daniel's praying from Babylon, and he's kind of like, what's going to happen next? Like, so you got to think, like, the context is Jerusalem's been destroyed. All the Jews, Israel is in captivity. Daniel's praying, like, what next? So Gabriel comes to talk to him, and then he starts to explain the things that are going to happen in the end times. And at one point, Gabriel literally tells Daniel, I think it's Daniel 12:4. He says, "Shut up the words of this prophecy until the times of the end." It's like he's basically saying, like, this is not for you. This is way in the. Don't tell people this, because it only scare them, because this is stuff for the future. So understand that. So when Jesus comes, it's this, like, I think his ministry starts the end of the 69th week. He gets baptized. And so the 70th week, like, literally based on Artaxerxes decrees the temple be rebuilt. So I think
Like
it's
640 something.
Yeah, so it's like 400 and 83 years is when Jesus gets baptized. I mean, do you think that time is coincidental? Obviously not. So he starts his ministry. And so Daniel's part of the prophecy is that halfway through the 70th week, the Messiah is cut off. Halfway through the 70th week, Jesus is crucified. That's when he's crucified. And so it mentions that he puts a stop to the sacrifices in the temple. And so this is where the modern futurist eschatology says, oh, it's the Antichrist that says to stop the sacrifices. Well, when Jesus was crucified, obviously as Christians, we believe that he was the final sacrifice. There was no need for animal sacrifices anymore. So the end of the 70th week ends with the stoning of Stephen. And if you think about it, like the original prophecy to Abraham was that he was going to have descendants as much as the sands of the sea, the stars in the sky. And then it was going to be like a kingdom that blessed everyone, all nations. So you think So the message went from the Jews and it went to the Gentiles after that. But so Matthew 24, the prophecy that was supposed to be for the times of the end, Jesus is telling his disciples about the abomination of desolation. And he was saying, when you see this, go to the mountains. I mean, literally, it starts with like he's saying the temple is going to be destroyed, and they ask him when. And he tells them all of the things that were supposed to be shut up till the end. And then he says, truly, I tell you, these things will not, all these things will take place before this generation passes away. And he says, heaven and earth will pass away, my words will not. And so he mentions the tribulation, the destruction of the temple, his return, all those things. And then even if you go into the book of Revelation, like I said, Daniel says, shut up the words of this prophecy until the times of the end. In the book of Revelation, the angel tells John, do not seal up this prophecy because the time is at hand. John literally starts that book off as saying that I'm your brother in tribulation, Revelation 1:9. So like what you understand is that Jesus came for a very specific time. And what it was I'm offering forgiveness for sins. I'm telling you to repent because judgment is coming in this generation. This wicked generation is judgment's coming. And Jesus offered them a way. And what did they do? They crucified him. So what happened after that? Their place was left desolate. It was destroyed.
Now, are we so I think the temple is destroyed in 70
AD. Mm-hmm. And
so
in a war with the Romans, this 3.5 years. So people
and odd things about that too is, I think it was Titus came up on Jerusalem, put it under siege, and then left in the middle of the night during the middle of that siege, which was prophesied to happen. And then there was a 4-year period where before Rome came back and completely desolated.
Well, it was 40. I mean, the Jewish-Roman War was 42 months. And if you read so Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 are all the same kind of, or they're telling the same account in like different perspectives. But like in Luke 21, it literally says, when you see the armies circling or surrounding Jerusalem, flee. And so that's the same thing as saying when you see the abomination of desolation. So that happened, I think, somewhere in like around 66 AD.
Right. Yeah.
And everything was destroyed by 70 AD. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. Like all the prophecies that we're mentioning, that specific amount of time, that all happened. And like historians, not Christian historians, Roman, Jewish historians like Josephus, there's even Tacitus, who's a famous Roman historian. In 65 or 66 AD, they literally talked about soldiers being in the clouds. Soldiers being gleaming angelic soldiers being in the clouds around all the events happening.
During the destruction of Jerusalem?
Yes.
See, that's fascinating to me because, I don't know how it is for others, but, Jehovah's Witnesses, they love to throw Josephus around when quoting, time from that period. But you never heard any part of those writings of Josephus. Those were never brought up in your studies, and
no.
If you do a little digging into Josephus, you're like, well, who do I believe? Do I believe this historian or should I believe this guy to be some, fairy tale maker?
Well, I guess the real question would be like, why would he lie about that? Because what if you know the background of Josephus, he was trained to be a Pharisee. He never converted to being a Christian. So like he has no reason to lie about this. So what like a lot of people would throw shade at him because he became a Roman. But again, he was a Jewish, a Jew became a Roman. He actually
there's benefits to citizenship,
Yeah, well, he actually prophesied, interestingly enough, that Vespasian was going to become the emperor, and that's why Vespasian kept him around. Like because he was involved in the war before he surrendered to the Romans, and then he was later became a Roman citizen because obviously he was a well-read guy. Here's the thing where people would say like, why should we believe Josephus? Well, for one, if you've ever heard the book by Lee Strobel, A Case for Christ, it relies a lot on people like Josephus. Josephus writes from like the antiquity of Jews.
Yes.
And like he basically confirms all the Bible. It's saying like, this is what we believed in the first century. So scoffers and mockers who would say, "Oh, you believe that book?" Well, Josephus is like going back 2,000 years to tell you, "Oh no, this is what we believed at the time. All the prophecies that point to this one man, this Messiah, point to Jesus." He lends credibility to the accounts of the apostles. So, like, if you're an apologist, you would point to Josephus as saying, like, this is a reason to believe the word of God. And then he writes these other things that, again, actually, if you're willing to accept it, lend credibility to the things that Jesus predicted, for sure. For like, whether you believe Jesus came back or not, one thing is without a doubt, he said the temple destruction would happen in their lifetimes, and it did. And but here, and like I said, but here's as the conspiracy theorist in me would say, why is that not written in your Bible then? Why does it have to be written by Flavius Josephus? Because we're told the book of Revelation by people who believe in the futurist eschatology that it was written in 95 AD. So why didn't the Apostle John write about the temple being destroyed? He was there when Jesus said it was going to happen in their generation.
When do you place the writing of the book of Revelation then?
I think credibility, I've heard more often it was placed somewhere around 65 or 66 AD, because he was
when they first started to encircle.
I want to say that there was something, and I said I'm unprepared a little bit on this, but I know that Nero's name was like Dominus Caesar Nero or something like that, and so some people translated, "Oh, that's Domitian," but it was actually Nero who did it. And I said, it just so happens that Caesar Nero in gematria in Hebrew was 666. So like a lot of the things he's talking about in there, I mean, obviously it all points to Rome. The city, it was seven hills.
So the Antichrist has already come and gone.
Well, I would say that based on if you believe in the little season, which I do at this point, I would say that the whole book of Revelation has not been fulfilled, but all the things that the people are looking for to happen, they've been fulfilled. I don't think this is a new heaven, it's new earth. I don't believe this is the end of this. I believe that that's what Satan's little season is, this time of deception. And what better way to deceive people by saying all this stuff is getting ready to happen. It hasn't happened yet. That's why like they point to like red heifers and, oh, they're going to build the temple again one day, when it's like that was one of the first clues to me. I was like, wait a minute. So we're waiting for a temple to be rebuilt so a man can go in there to stop the sacrifices that haven't taken place for 2,000 years. Does that sound stupid to anyone else? I mean, so like literally like the future eschatology says the only reason the temple is going to be rebuilt is so a man can go in there and desecrate it. That's the only reason, because the Bible doesn't talk about a third temple. It literally doesn't.
I'm pretty sensitive about the red heifer subject. Just, it seems a lot of ginger hate in this.
Well, it's got to be a red one.
Yes, yeah, I know, right? Pure, and I am pure red.
But you're not a heifer. Stop it.
Okay, so I guess when I want to keep playing with this idea of the little season, short season. So Jesus comes back at the destruction of the temple.
Well, I think this is where it can get a little bit like maybe the interpretations of what he's saying is a little bit amiss, because what he's really saying is he's coming in judgment. And so you think about, here's a good parable, is the parable of the wicked tenants. So what Jesus is telling, if you guys are not aware of this parable, it's like the owner owns a vineyard and he leases out to tenants, and the tenants are supposed to bring the owner fruit, except for they don't. And then he sends servants to get fruit from them, and they refuse to give them his servants. Eventually they beat his servants, and then he sends, well, I'm going to send my son to them. Surely they'll honor him. No, they kill his son and they throw his body away. And then Jesus says, what? And he's telling the Pharisees this prophecy or this parable. And he says, well, what's the owner going to do? And he's like, he's going to destroy those tenants and he's going to give the vineyard to other people. And so that's what's happening. It's like, I mean, if you really think about it, if God is the same God yesterday, today, and forever, read the Old Testament. Do you think that God, the God of the Old Testament, would allow his son to be nailed to a cross and there'd be no repercussions after that? Like, that's the wicked generation he's talking to, is the one who won't repent even when his son is there. And so when Jesus dies, he's resurrected, he's given all authority over heaven and earth.
At resurrection.
Right. So you think about it. So he took the keys to hell and death, and he
Yep.
goes, and then eventually he tells everyone this, proclaim this gospel to all nations, and then he ascends to heaven and takes his place by the right hand of the Father. The eternal kingdom had started at that point, right? Because obviously, if you accepted Jesus at the point, you had eternal life. That's all of the things he was offering everyone. And so, but what he was really saying, you think about the other parables where he's saying it's like a master going on a trip, right? And if the servants aren't ready when the master returns, okay, so you think about it, he's telling his people that he, like, what would they get out of that parable? A servant is left in charge with these things as his master goes on trip and is coming back. And then you start to read the letters from the apostles, and they all say Jesus is coming back soon. Why did they think that? Because he told them he was coming back soon. They all believed it because he told them, their generation. They didn't know when, but they knew he was coming back to them. And what the second coming was described as is not what the modern church talks about, is the rapture. Oh, this secret rapture that takes you away from everything bad. What Jesus describes as the second coming is, I'm going to come like a thief in the night. And if you're not ready, you're dead. Like that's what the thief in the night was about. So when you think about it, he's telling the apostles about 70 AD. If you see these things, go, flee. And if you're not ready, it'll be like the days of Noah, when everyone's pretending like everything's fine, and then the flood comes. So it wasn't like what we're taught. I think that's the point. It's like, so after Jerusalem gets what he prophesied, the beast, Rome, gets it next. And then I think the timeline is like, it's not 7 years. We don't know exactly what the timeline is, but the point is, all the things he said were going to happen happened
in that generation. That's interesting. So somewhere between 70 and 100 AD, we see Christ present on earth. Now, are you saying so he physically rules on earth during this 1,000-year time? Or
here's what I'll say. I am not positive how the millennial reign goes. I mean,
how dare you?
Well, if you think about it, well, I mean, I said I want to say that this is generally how I present things. I can point you strictly to the scriptures, and I can say I know this because I believe what he said. Now, can I give you all the evidence for all the things that happened? No, I mean, I can't, because obviously I'm a history skeptic anyways. So I'm trying to say that I know with my heart and soul that Jesus said what he said. And so, like, what I'll tell you is I believe him. Now, can I show you all the things that happened in the book of Revelation? No, I can't. I'm trying. I'm working on that. But what I do believe is that when Jesus tells the Pharisees, the kingdom of God does not come with observation. You can't say, lo, it's here, lo, it's there. He's like, the kingdom of God is within you. And he's also saying when he's leaving, he's telling the apostles he's going to prepare a place for them. And then where I go, I'm going to bring you also. So I think that some of us believe that the heavenly Jerusalem, it's talked about in Revelation 21, it descends down. Now, there's lots of mythologies all around the world about a floating city. Maybe a city that you can't quite perceive as, like, you think like flesh and blood are not going to inherit the kingdom of God. You cannot go there. But it's possible, just as what it says in Ephesians, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the cosmic powers over this present darkness. In the book of Daniel, it says that the saints or the wise are going to shine like the stars. I believe, this is my belief, is that the saints replace those rebellious angels that fell, and they rule just like they did. So I believe that the saints could kind of come and go as they please, as Jesus could as well. And I think that's why they're depicted with all the halos in, like all these megalithic structures, or these cathedrals and these epic buildings, because I think there was some connection. I believe it was both physical and spiritual, and I don't think that he didn't reign in Jerusalem. That place was left desolate. It was a different Jerusalem. It was a heavenly one, and I think that.
Well, in the Hindu, don't they talk about, cities in the sky and these huge battles that take place in the clouds, and
Yes.
a bunch of different cultures talk about huge battles that take place in the heavens. But I guess I've always been programmed to think, well, they're talking about something like 8,000 years ago, like 10,000 years ago. And now, with this belief in the short season, this is very, it's not that long ago, we're talking what, 2,000 years ago?
Well, that's the real question, is like how reliable can we trust the timeline now? And I think that's where that I have believed the Bible, and I've said I believe the Bible since I started to make videos. But what I started to look into all the other conspiracies, and I started to get a little bit leery about what the mud flood. There's something that happened about 250 years ago, and I don't really know how to explain it other than it's weird. And so I think this is my belief now. Somewhere around 250 years ago, something really bad happened to this place, like a reset, like whatever you want to call it. Now, the people who are not Christians would just call it that. It was a reset. The controllers pulled some switch and everything changed. But I think that the history we've been taught is basically a very revised history of a very modern history, and it does not account for the things that happened before. So when we're taught about the dark ages now, this 1,000-year period where they did nothing except for build the best buildings ever. And they were a bunch of, uncultured swine basically in this time. But for some reason they did a lot of good things. There was not major wars during that period. It was almost like a time of peace and prosperity where they did a lot of good art. They made a lot of good buildings. They made a lot of good music. And we're taught this false history.
Supposedly in no time too. These guys are banging out these projects.
Well, I think that's when it seems to me that when there was this reset, there was obviously a class of people who they were taught lies about this thing. So it's kind of well, how did that building get there? Oh, we built that last year. Well, how long did it take you to build it? 1 year. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty impressive.
It's like a toddler. It's like, how long did it take?
It's taken me 3 years to build this mud out over here, but hey,
Right. Well, so what I've wondered recently, and like I said, this is still obviously a working theory, because I would say really, it wasn't only till the end of last year, beginning of this year. I mean, I've been hearing these things, and I wasn't willing to accept it until very recently. So I've been really digging into it lately. But I mean, that's what we're taught, is that things happened a long time ago. Okay, so all this Roman stuff that they did was way long ago. But then you find out the Romans. Okay, so was it the Pantheon in Rome? It's the biggest concrete unsupported dome in the world. Okay, so if you look at Wikipedia, they'll tell you this building was built anywhere from between 1 AD and 600. Okay, so what they're saying is they have no idea when this was built. And then you look at some of the modern old world buildings, and they look very similar. And you're saying, yes. So what if somebody told you that the reason that Washington, D.C. looks like ancient Rome is because maybe they were built around the same time? Now, I mean, obviously that sounds insane, and I admit that.
It does sound insane.
But the technology,
I don't hate it.
But the technology is the same. The things they did were the same. So isn't that kind of you know what I mean? If you had two different skyscrapers and they look almost the same, you would say, oh, well, they probably were built around the same time period. What we're taught is that guys from Great Britain thought Roman architecture was cool, and that's why they built it like that. When they weren't Italians, right? They weren't Greeks. They were Europeans that were supposedly thousands of years separated from that culture. But they built it like that because it's cool.
Well, and like I nerded out one night and watched a documentary on concrete, and they were talking about this Roman concrete, and they still don't know exactly how they did it, but when it cracks, the minerals inside of it regenerate and grow out and self seal the crack. It's amazing. Like they're in awe by this concrete, and that was supposedly developed thousands of years ago, and we don't even know how to.
I need some of that for my shop floor. I need
And
to get some of that.
what we're taught is that the Romans wrote everything down. So explain to me how that technology was lost.
I promised for
just like how we went to the moon. It was lost.
We had to destroy that concrete technology.
Yeah.
We have to build it back now.
All right. Let's rate it in for Moon Conspiracy Talk here. We got our first caller, Charlie. Thanks for calling in, Charlie. Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear Charlie. You perfect. How you, what's your question, Charlie?
Have you ever heard of Jordan Maxwell?
Me and Constant Mayhem are completely new to all of this. So
your guess.
I've heard the name. I'm not sure who he is.
You should watch some. He's dead now. He died, I think, 2 years ago. But he was like 78 years old when he died. But for 60 years, he's been dissecting the Bible, from the original Greek and all that. And I'm telling you, he shoots holes through the Bible that we have today. I believe in the red letters of the Bible, supposedly the teachings of Jesus. But the rest of it, I was going to text you, comment that I was born Catholic. Okay. I don't trust anything the Catholic Church has their hands in over the centuries. And have you ever heard of the Cathards?
I have not heard of the Cathards.
But you need to look up the Cathards. This is like 11th to 12th century.
Okay.
They were a sect of Christians that believed in reincarnation, and they didn't want to come back to this world. So they didn't procreate. They would have died off if they had just left them alone, but the Catholic Church had to extinguish them. And their fortress that they lived in had such thick walls that it took them a very long time to kill these people off. But if they had just left them alone. Now, I learned that from another podcast, okay, the Cathards. That was in like France or somewhere that this happened. But the church, I mean, we've heard all the things about the Inquisitions and all that stuff. But I'm telling you, Jordan Maxwell dissects all of the Bible. And one thing that he said, that do you know that there was like 15 or 16 crucified saviors before Jesus?
That's a lot. That's not true.
They've got written documentation of things.
The zeitgeist is a bunch of lies. And I think that's just it. There's many stories that are similar to the story of Jesus, but they're not the same. And just because some guy said it, I mean, like, obviously you got to have more receipts than some guy named Jordan Maxwell said something. I mean, like I said, because I could say there's a lot of proof that the Bible is true versus this guy says it's not.
Charlie, when you hear the term the short season or the little season, have you ever considered that had already taken place?
I think to what's her name? There's No Place Like Home. She has a podcast. I'm trying to think of her name.
Shelley.
Anyways, but she's been discussing that, go back and forth about the 1,000-year, one thing, I live near Wilmington, North Carolina, and you were just talking about the Roman concrete and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But you should go check out the courthouse in Wilmington. They have pillars out front that are 4 feet across at the base.
Wow.
Out of metal on the veneer is metal, cast iron. In 1865, 5,
which would be around that time.
40 feet high, 4 feet at the bottom, and they're tapered. And it appears that they're in 6 or 7 foot sections. So in other words, they had to mold cast iron form that all match end to end to the tapered top. And I was in construction. I was on the show with Chris from.
Oh yes, yes.
And I'm telling you, I used to deliver bricks from a lumber yard that I worked with. We worked with a lot of masons, and we used to get cubes of bricks that I had to haul 6 or 8 cubes of bricks to job sites. And you're going to tell me in 1855, they built a building that size. And if you look at the bricks on these buildings, they are perfect. You know, the contractors I worked with, they used to discard half the bricks out of the cubes I delivered because they were either chipped or, you know, the quality of the concrete isn't the same and the quality of the bricks isn't the same that it was 150, 200 years ago. It's just unbelievable.
Charlie, thanks so much for calling in. Feel free to call in anytime to our shows. We love it when you come on the show.
But anyway, I'd check out Jordan Maxwell if I were you.
Appreciate it, Charlie. Appreciate it. It's Charlie calling in. We appreciate Charlie calling in.
We've heard the 15 or the 16 copy and paste. I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago or a month ago. You know, how we don't know where it stands and whatnot, but like also maybe it was me wouldn't be surprised either in a sense of 15 or 16 different versions of something that, you know, keep everything, I guess, relevant for the time. I don't know.
Well, here's where I think here's where this stuff comes from, is that Jesus came in a certain point in time, but the prophecies of Jesus are old and they were true. So again, if you believe in 2 factions, you have God's side and you have the devil's side. So the devil was aware of the prophecies about Jesus, but he obviously didn't know all of it. You know, and I think that's like the death and the resurrection was different than the other ones. Like, that's why people would say, like, oh, Jesus is like every other son God. He's like the son of God, the son God. But no, that they're very similar. I mean, that's why likely we celebrate Christmas at Christmas time, because it was the resurrection of the son, or the rebirth of the son is December 25th. I've done videos about this. So if you guys are not aware, there's these pagan dying.
I was raised JW.
Yeah, these dying and rising sun mythologies. So on December 21st, the sun dies, the winter solstice, and so on the 25th, after 3 days, it starts to rise again. I mean, I believe that very likely, probably not likely, probably for sure, that God has put these certain signs in the heavens as points to his son. But obviously what the devil would do is try to co-opt that, and they would say, oh, well, this is about Horus, this is about Tammuz, this is about Mithra, and all these other kind of pagan sun mythologies. But no, but the story of Jesus is always different. I mean, Jesus was lowly. He was not like the other ones, right? He was not born to the king on the earth. He was born as a carpenter's son, and he lived a destitute life, and he was not a man of all these means like the other ones, right? He was the humble king, and his king was not of this world, not like Tammuz, not like the other ones. And I think that if you think about it, all they have to do is the people who don't want to believe, all they have to tell them is, oh yeah, that story's already been told. And they said, okay, good enough for me. I don't have to believe it anymore. But they actually haven't done the research, and they haven't.
You've been digging into this for years now.
Well, right. They have not checked the receipts, because like I said, I think that's where most people are. It's like, well, that's good enough for me. Christianity's been debunked. Honestly, guys, if you really think about it, as many people come at Christianity, if it was that simple, they would have done it by now. I mean, like I said, I think that's why people who search through the truth, they find it always points back to Jesus. It points back to the Bible, because the people who try to debunk it, they're like, oh, this is difficult. Like, it sounds like some of this stuff came true. And I think that when it comes down to it, And this is the sad thing. This is the sad thing for the modern church, is to try to say, well, Jesus didn't come back in the first century. He says he was going to. So they've kind of lend credibility to the skeptics who say, well, Jesus said a lot of true things except for this. When they should actually, like I said, if you think about it,
it's symbolic. It's symbolic for something else.
Or right, he was talking about, he was saying, when he was saying that some of you will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. He was saying, oh, well, when like when you're resurrected, or the book of Revelation or the Transfiguration, he wasn't talking literally. When, if you understand, like, I think that the probably, if you guys take nothing away from this, take this away, that context matters. And so Jesus didn't write the Bible. He's talking to people, and somebody wrote down the things he said to people. And so if he told these people something specifically to them, what are they to get out of that message? Are they to believe him? So if he told them something that did not happen to them, well, then it's not true. And so it's not true to you either. So it either was true to them, and it's not, you can, obviously, the Bible was written for us, but not to us. You can gain something out of what he said that came true. But no, that was not written for 2,000 years later. That was written for right then. And then what do you take from that thing that he said was true that happened?
We got another caller in, Rock E. Can you hear us, Rock? I think you're. Hey, there you are. Rock, what question you got for JP?
Well, have you heard about all these Roman buildings all over the world? It seems like Rome was bigger than what they say it was, and they're like they made up this fake Israel. It's only like 77 years old, and we could believe it's anywhere they tell us, So I'm wondering, do you guys think that they're like, you think Rome was bigger than it was because it's supposed to be worldwide or something?
That's a good question. What do we explain? Why is architecture always sort of based around this Greco-Roman design all across the world?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of people who do the same kind of research I do that do question the locations we've been taught. And I mean, I would say that based on, if they taught you a false history, why couldn't they lie about the locations? I mean, how will we know? I've never even been over to the Middle East, so I don't really know. I've heard a lot of people who say that there's mountains described in the Bible that are not mountains, like they're literally hills. Like the Mount of Olives, Mount Zion, all these kind of places, they're not mountains. There's like one mountain in Israel, and it's Mount Hermon. All the other ones are hills. So can we reasonably conclude that that's actually the geographic place? I mean, there's reason to ask those questions, I believe, because I mean, even like the Sea of Galilee, people say that's like a lake, like the Jordan River is like a creek. It's like, it's not as grand as the Bible makes it out to be. And they know that the Bible knows, the people in the Bible knew the difference between mountains and hills. They knew the difference between creeks and rivers. And I guess the thing is, like, that even if you believe based on what we know, like 2,000 years, a lot of things can change. So I think that there's reason to believe that there's some people who do my research actually believe that some of the stuff actually happened in North America. Actually, red heifers, that's actually, somebody mentioned, that they had to get them from Texas. Okay, so if they were comments at the Middle East, why could they not get them there? What was another thing? I think even like there's in the KJV version, it mentions at one point that the apostles were picking corn, and corn and maize is something that we're taught came from North America. There's another one, I think, like certain types of trees that are native to here and not over there. I guess to me, I'm of the belief of like that I would, if I had to put money on it, I would say I believe that the Middle East is the actual locations based on a lot of other ancient sites. But there is reason for skepticism of, like, you go into the Grand Canyon, they got a temple of Isis there. They have a temple of Osiris, a tower of Ra, temple of Shiva, and
Egyptian artifacts found inside these temples, inside the Grand Canyon, that supposedly are at the Smithsonian, our favorite museum of nothing.
So you got my shirt.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of reason for skepticism, and I think that when it comes down to it, like that, if you believe in science, it's kind of like prove it to me, right? Like it's like I should be able to I want to see all the receipts, and I don't think that in a lot of cases I don't think they have them.
Rock, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, it seems there's more pyramids in where that went across the eclipse in that area.
Like
they got
Missouri.
a town named Memphis, Tennessee, And anyway, I'm from Nebraska, Omaha. Go.
Oh, we're gonna mute you there, bud. Not gonna put up with that. Go Hawks, I think is what he intended to say. We're not done. See what you've done, May. God damn it. There's a couple of interesting videos we had seen. I just want to play a couple clips. This one is about the deserts. May, you sent me this. We can stop it as you go too.
All the Anunnaki and Thoth and all that.
They had 2 wars. The first pyramid war almost eradicated.
Now this stuff, like this beginning stuff, I always think, like this is just folklore. Like I mean, there's definitely something that happened, but like you're gonna get into like Anunnaki had this war, then they had this war. Like I don't, I feel like that makes you lose a lot of your credibility. Like it's okay not to know stuff too. But he does talk about the desert here, and I thought this was sort of an interesting point he made.
Arid desert, no, that's war. If you go to Egypt and stick your hand deep in the sands, eventually you're going to come up with balls of glass. How can you get glass and sand? 3,000 plus degree temperatures. You go to Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, what are you going to see there? Dead bodies still in the streets from thousands of years ago, still holding hands, never been scavenged. The buildings that they lived in turned to glass. How can that be? We're talking about 3,000 plus degree temperature weapons fire. We're talking about this war that happened in the ancient past. Amun-Ra wanted to continue he started the first war to take over the earth early because he didn't want to wait for his processional period to rule. And then this is the guy who says, you must say amen after everything. Say amen. Everything you give thanks for, you're saying amen to him. So when you say amen, you're thanking him. By the way. A brutal killing guy. But anyway, so he says, it's a fact. He started one war to take over early, which he won.
Yeah.
He then started a second war to stay in power. And in that second war, he escaped. He was almost killed. But he left his kingship and the finances of the kingdom to the Ra-Kam. And R-A-K-A-M. But that translates into modern words. Kam translates into childs. So now you translate Ra childs.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, I mean, like you said, and actually, that's the thing that I would say. It's like the first thing I'd say. That's an interesting story. How do you know all that? Like, that's where did you get that knowledge from? That sounds like it happened a long time ago. So, what did you read to learn that? And I think that's the problem. And I think that's the same problem like most people have with the science is they're like, okay, so what's your source? Trust me, bro. Oh, trust me. That like Amun-Ra said all this stuff. And that's the reason you say amen. It's like, first of all, English is a different language than they spoke them, I guess. Right. I would say. And all that, I think this guy very clearly is like a guy who's into esoteric stuff. And he's running that with like it's facts. And that's what I'm saying. Like as somebody like me, who's a Christian, I care about the truth. I'll tell you when I don't know. And I'll tell you this is what I think. And I'll tell you this is what this text says. And this is why I believe certain things. But at the same time, the Anunnaki stuff is very similar to the story of like the Book of Enoch and the Watchers and the things that the angels did. It's a very similar story. So I'm one of those people that believe that there is one big story that's based on the true story. And I would say, obviously, the biblical account's true. It's not a lot of detail about that. It's not a lot of detail about what happened before the flood. the times of Nimrod, all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of stuff did happen at that time. And I also believe, the one thing I also believe that he said, the deserts of the world, the places that God actually said would be desolate, the western part of the United States, it looks like something really bad happened there. It looks post-apocalyptic in lots of places on the earth because I believe it was.
What do
The
you think?
Watchers. I saw a bunch of stuff on TikTok about that just recently. That's interesting you said that, because that just I was literally scrolling at like midnight last night. I want to say, was it M. Night Shyamalan, whatever? He's coming out with a movie.
Well, his daughter, I think it's actually his
Oh,
daughter
his
who's
daughter?
the director of this one, or the creator.
Yeah. Okay. Is that in the same line? I have no idea.
I did a video about that just based on the trailer. It's like the Watchers. I mean, do you think like so Watchers is mentioned in the book of Daniel. It's most famously probably mentioned in the book of Enoch. That those are the angels who sinned with women, created the Nephilim, the giants, all that kind of stuff. And so the Watchers were obviously not supposed to interfere with men in that kind of way, and that's why they're called the Watchers. Even think like in the Marvel comics, they had a cosmic being called the Watcher, and he was not supposed to interfere. He was really powerful, but he was not supposed to interfere. And he interferes like in the story of like Galactus and the Silver Surfer and all that kind of stuff. It's the same story. But the interesting part about that Watchers trailer is based on the book of Enoch. Those Watchers who sinned were put into the earth. They were in chains underneath the earth. Well, we're shown in that trailer, there's a big hole in the ground, and there's like a skeleton that has wings. I mean, like, yes, I think that they're showing you once again, like, that these Watchers who were once angels are now demons.
And these are the ones that
Hollywood doesn't make anything that doesn't have some kind of receipt to it. Like, they don't just pull this from thin air.
They're not that creative. They're not.
No, not at all.
The Watchers. I don't know if you ever seen the TV show Fringe, but I think they had a similar concept where I forget what they called them, but pretty much these humans that just observed. They were not allowed to interact with what was going on, but just observation. Isn't it weird? Like, I mean, you go back to all, you mentioned the Silver Surfer comics, how all of these stories have been sort of passed on to their generation in some form of the other.
Yeah, well, I mean, the story of the Silver Surfer is a really good one too, because it's like, there's this God character who's bad. Okay, so you think about it, like this is how Hollywood twists the true story. That it's Gnosticism, where it's an inverted hermeneutic where the God of the Bible is evil, and then the devil is the hero. So the story of the Silver Surfer, the original one, is that he sacrificed himself to become Galactus's herald. Galactus is looking for planets to destroy because he consumes planets. Well, the Silver Surfer is supposed to go find the planets for him to destroy. He finds Earth, and then he befriends the people there. I think he specifically contacts Sue Storm, and then he decides he's going to rebel against his creator. And then so his creator decides eventually that he won't destroy the Earth, but he's going to bind the Silver Surfer to Earth, and he's no longer allowed to travel outside of it. It's like the story of the Garden of Eden, basically.
Yes.
It's like
that
the Gnostics would say that the devil was the good guy because he told them the truth, when it's the opposite. Is like, you can't be as gods. You, like, now that humanity is doomed to death because of the sin. But yeah, he ate of the tree, and then he gave them the knowledge, and then, but yeah, I guess it's all twisted up because like our God is not that bad. But I mean, like but if you think about it in the way that our God is good, so at some point he comes for judgment for the wicked. The people who love the world and who run the world would obviously see that as a threat, which, I mean, it is. Like I said, he's the thief in the night. It was not a promise of a rapture. It was a threat against the people who were not ready.
Precision Rifleman's been in the comments, just commenting it up. Appreciate it. He mentioned this whole topic went viral last 6 months. within the VT community of old world channels, all coming to conclusion that the millennial kingdom has passed. So, like, does that mean we're just sort of screwed? If that's the case, and I can't remember my theology that well, but if Christ's reign has already, done its 1,000 years, now the devil's out to cause havoc until it's time for him to be. I think he gets thrown into the lake of fire after this round, doesn't he?
Right. Well, after the short season, yes. Well, he takes the nations. They surround the camp of the saints wherever Jesus and the saints would be, and they're burned up with fire. And after that, he's thrown into the lake of fire, and then there's a new heaven and new earth. Okay, so that's a good question because I think that's why a lot of people would say, heretic, you just said that Jesus already came back, then we have no hope for anything. But if you think about Jesus' earthly ministry, was he promising people 1,000 years? Or was he promising them, if you drink of the living waters, you will thirst no more. You'll live again. I'm promising you the resurrection. And so I believe those promises are still good today. And what we're offered in Revelation 21 is a place with no tears forever. So it's kind of like that. If you believe what we've been taught, well, you would probably say, if you're waiting on a rapture, do you know anybody who's been raptured? No.
I call my uncle every now and then just to make sure.
Just because you go stay in that cabin.
Just gauge the temperature.
Right. But so what I'm saying is like that anybody who would say that if I tell you that he already came back, well, then I have nothing to look forward to. Then you're like, well, what did everyone else have to look forward to that who's already, died and then we're in the ground? You think that they didn't get anything? Because
the big churches on TV wouldn't like that either. You can't sell that narrative. They won't make the money. Joel Osteen will get pissed if you tell his people the boat's already come and gone. So,
well, it's like you ever heard that old saying that everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die?
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's this, and this is the kind of the more crazy point when you think about it. Like, the reason Jesus was crucified is because he did not give the people what the modern church wants. Because what they wanted for him to do was to show up. They were under the oppression of Rome, right? They wanted him to lift them out of oppression, and they want to reign with him right afterwards, right? So when they found out, he said, no, you're going to have to suffer. You have to be like me. You're going to have to, a servant's not greater than his master. You're not going to get all the things you want right now because you're going to need to die to get it. Well, they nailed him to a cross afterwards. I believe this, that the modern church would nail him to a cross today because he's not offering them what they think that they want, because they don't want to suffer. Like I said, that eschatology that came from like that you'll get raptured before anything bad happens. That is so unbiblical. Again, like it's funny how like they can even just like without even a hint of irony. Well, all the apostles were martyred. Do you know they used to feed the Christians to lions? You ever know what a Roman candle was? It was when they tied a Christian to a stake and they lit up the streets with his body. Like that that's what happened in the times of the early
thousands.
Thousands.
Nero did that to thousands of Christians.
The times of the early church, that's what they did to Christians. And they're thinking like, oh, the Great Tribulation is going to be really bad. I wonder what it's going to be like. And it's like what do you think that is? Like, that sounds like a great tribulation. like, could you imagine things worse than that? But again, it's like, it's the dispensationalism and futurist eschatology it's a me thing, where it's like, well, obviously we are the most important generation because we're the ones who are going to get raptured and we're going to go reign with Jesus. When you're like, well, what about his apostles? Didn't they that was a pretty important time, right? What about the early church who were like literally dying to spread the gospel? And an interesting point is like, I haven't specifically quoted a bunch of scriptures, but like some people will say, well, Jesus can't come back until the gospel has been preached all around the nation. Colossians 1:23 mentions that all creatures under heaven and earth have heard the gospel. So in the times of the apostles, all this stuff had happened that they said was going to happen. And to me, it's like, like our hope is in him no matter what. It just like in the times of like Abraham, where he was promised all these things that he was never going to live to see in his lifetime, but the promises were true then, even if he was going to die before he saw them all.
JT, so like, what time are we in now then? Like, I mean, what's the end game for us? We're just going to die, essentially. We just die, and then we can have a chance to get resurrected. Is that how?
Well, I mean, the Bible says that every man's appointed to die. You know, every man is appointed like to die once. So
right.
I would say yes, we're going to have to die one day. We're going to have to live a life that's honoring to God in order to get what God has offered us.
What does that mean though for like the because if obviously the evil spirits are roaming this world, we see it everywhere, and it's just amped up more with attacks on the family structure and so on and so forth. Is it even worth trying to fight against those evil forces, or is it better just to submit to their being real, and they're going to have their time in the sun and just worry about me and my own?
Well, I would say that in the little season, if you believe where we are, I would say that no, you're not supposed to just accept it. You know what I mean? Like, you're supposed to speak truth. You're supposed to obviously love each other, and you're supposed to try your best to make this place better than it is. And then one day you might, like when God calls you home, it'll be time. I mean, there's also the fact that if we're in the little season, there's a time where Gog and Magog, there's this epic battle that happens at the end where the devil's defeated, the nations are defeated, and then it comes the new heaven and new earth. Now, some people believe, and I'm kind of on the same mindset, that we're heading toward that, and it's coming soon, because I do believe that a lot of people have looked at these signs as end times signs, when the end times were like 2,000 years ago. This is a cyclical thing, so there's another type of end times. This might be the final end times that we're leading up to, because I mean, everybody can feel it. I think everyone who's probably woke up in 2020 realized there's been a shift. Now, how common is a shift like this in our lifetimes? I mean, I guess we don't really know. I mean, like, even like the book of
9/11.
Well, like the book of Ecclesiastes says that there's no memory of the things that happened before. Like, nothing new under the sun. So, like, I do believe there's cyclical things that happen in biblical prophecy. But like, what's interesting is that in order for the devil to gather the nations to go fight, it might look like a one world government's coming together. Is that what's happening right now? Sure looks like it. I mean, it sure looks like that the place we live in is trying to be sabotaged by the people who supposedly running the place. I mean, that might be a conspiracy theory, but it looks like this place sucks, and they want it to suck. I mean, am I wrong about that? I mean, like, all these places around the world that actually had these very impressive histories, they're just willing to let it just be completely just undermined from within. Their borders mean nothing. Nobody cares about any of that stuff anymore. What's good is bad. What's bad is good. Light's dark, dark's light. I mean, like, that seems like that when common sense sounds like genius now. Like, yes. Oh, look, do you hear what Elon Musk said? He said free speech is good. Can you believe it? It's like, so now all of a sudden he's touted as Tony Stark. Like, everyone used to think that like 5 years ago. Like, why are you everyone giving him so many pats on the back? Because it's unusual to hear just common sense now. And it's not because people got stupid, because like, look at the people who run the government now. They're the same ones who ran it during 9/11.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, go look at that old speech. I mean, like, go look up an old speech from Bill Clinton about the border.
Yeah.
Ask him what he thinks about the border now. It's like that he would be a far right winger now.
Or, Republicans, when they talk about the FISA court and illegal spying, and then, when push comes to shove, they pass that through in the middle of the night. All of these freedoms have been slowly eroding away from, I think, like America, and, maybe that's just my nationalism speaking, but like the ability to have rights given to us by a higher creator than what our government, seems something divine about that. And then to watch, for them to install this one world government, they have to get rid of our rights. And you see it. It's been a process since the 60s, slowly eroding away. Before the 60s, I guess you could say, but definitely since the 60s, you've seen an erosion of our rights as a United States citizens. It just, I see a lot of Christians. They're just like, well, the devil's going to do what it's his world. God is going to fix it all. I'm just going to sit alone, and make sure my family's taken care of, and that be, wait the storm out.
Well, I think that I think like your uncle said, it's like the rapture theology. It's like that. Hey, well, you can have my stuff when I'm out of here. Like, I'll be on the streets of gold and everything. So like you can pick up the pieces when I'm gone, and I'll just be hanging out here, just like living my best life, like Joel Osteen said, until then. And then I can wash my hands of it. Even it's funny, it's like, I don't want to get too much into politics, but it's funny. I was joking on my last live stream. I said, I kind of want to vote. I said I would never vote again after 2020, but I kind of want to vote for Trump after he got convicted of all these felonies, because it's like I kind of almost want to throw up the bird to the system now, and that's why I want to vote for him. When I said I would never vote again because they knifed him in the back, and I was like, and that's one of the reasons I woke up. And some people are like, "Oh, don't you know that Trump is bad?" I'm like, he's not as bad as the guy that's in there.
Yeah,
he's definitely not as bad. And so, like, if I believe that we're in this short season, and it might not be short enough to me to live, like I'm probably going to live through it. Maybe I'm at least like I should plan for it. Okay, so what about my kids? Okay, so he's bad, but I mean, like, so I should just do nothing. And so, like, it gets frustrating for me because it's like, don't you guys go to the grocery store? It's like, okay, well, he's bad, but I mean, like, that guy's bad too, and
the banana prices are bad. What are you talking about? Yeah.
I mean, Lord willing, I'll be well off enough to eventually get off the grid. But the way things are going, I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be in the poorhouse, and then we're going to be forced.
That's exactly where they want us.
Forced into the new system. So I'm like, so should I not be involved in any of this stuff until, because this guy's ungodly? It's like, when's the last time you voted for somebody who was godly? Like, should we have never voted? Should we never try to improve the place the best way we can based on understanding that we're voting with flawed people? Where I'm saying like that, yeah, it does. I mean, it does seem like a lot of people are saying, like, just washing their hands of it, like Pontius Pilate. Well, I can't do anything with this. When it's like, have you tried? You keyboard warriors just saying how like everything's demonic. It's like, is that enough, or should you actually try to do a little bit, throw your hat in the ring and do something good to show people a better way?
Well, and that's the thing with these mainstream religions, is they teach this. And I honestly, I feel it's by design to put people in a comatose state. Like, you just go through the traditions, you listen to what your pastor says, and then you go home, do it again next week, and just, anything comes along, well, God will take care of it. God will take care of it. And then, you see what we see going on today. And I feel like the inactivity of, they say America is, percentage wise, it's gone down, but, still heavily Christian. I mean, it's the main religion of the United States as far as people that profess to be one.
Well, it's kind of like the whole thing where like that evil triumphs when good men do nothing. So it's one thing for me to say I believe this, but then to just like, okay, you see drag story time, and I'm just supposed to be like, well, that's bad, and then I'm just like, but what are you doing about it? Like, do you really care? And it's funny,
exactly.
Even think about it like this, that again, this is not like to say that Trump is not without his flaws, because he's got lots of them. I mean, like I said, I slam on the Operation Warp Speed all the time.
Yeah.
If you wanted to vote against him because of that, well, I mean, I'm not going to give you a hard time about that. But at the same time, look in the Bible. Do you know when people of Israel and Judah did good is when they had a better king, and when they had a horrible king, they were awful? So leadership does matter. And if we can do anything to to help that, well, then maybe that actually is what we should do. I think what I would say that what Christians should also do is not put our faith in those people. Like, I mean, I could you could cast your vote in the ballot box and say, well, this is the best I can do today for this. I mean, I'm not going to, whether the good wins or the bad wins, whoever I think is the right candidate, I can still say God is in charge. And as we have all said, that like, if God can use bad things for our good, well, I mean, bad things in my life brought me closer to him. It doesn't mean I wish for bad things. It doesn't mean I try to, it doesn't mean I try to make them worse so I'll get closer to God. It's like that I think like, well, this is in your hands, God. I mean, this is what I believe. And my heart. My heart says that I think this would be better for more people. So I might do this. And this is not a tell everyone to vote for, Trump or whatever. But I'm just saying like that maybe that mindset has got us where like some people say Trump is the Antichrist. Well, what if the Antichrist came 2,000 years ago? Would that change your vote? Right? Like, what if Nero was the Antichrist? Would you still vote for a regular guy what if he wasn't the Antichrist?
What did King David, Donald Trump, and Cussing with Hussing all have in common?
Okay.
The red heifers?
We're all gingers. All right. All right. Well, we're at an hour and a half. Is there anything, JT, you would like to plug? Anything you're working on? Anything you would want to leave our audience with for their own research?
It's funny, we didn't talk about as much as I thought we would, but I mean the mud flood. I mean, I would just say that like if you're on the fence about like any things I'm saying, for one, go to scripture and like I said, and try this. Try to read it with the context that the audience specific. So read it for who the audience is, and then try to understand from their worldview like what's being said, especially the New Testament. Just read it like that, and it'll change you. But secondarily, historically, there's no history about the mud flood, but there's evidence for it everywhere. Yeah. Every city, every old city around the world has evidence of stuff buried, and the omission of history about that event, whatever that may be, to me is proof or evidence, maybe not proof, evidence of a giant conspiracy, like the biggest conspiracy ever, of what happened before. And so what happened before? Well, to some of us researching this, we say the biggest thing ever, the millennial kingdom. Evidence. Well, I mean, like I said, but without even saying that, even if you're not on the fence about that, there's evidence of an advanced civilization in our very recent past, more advanced than us. And the evidence is everywhere. Like the things that we can't do that are not done now. And like, so why aren't they done? And I think that to me, it's like why would they hide that unless they were hiding pretty much the biggest thing ever? And I think that I said to me, it's like, that's a spiritual thing. Because I do believe this, like based on my knowledge of the Bible, and I believe the Holy Spirit leading me to this, is that I don't think people are as evil as they act without the devil influencing them. The atrocities that happened in the world wars, that obviously are very recent events, like history-wise, like stuff like, isn't it interesting? The Tatarian Empire never talked about. It's real. I mean, look it up. You go look it up. Isn't it an interesting coincidence that our history books mention that the communists, and between the communists and the Russian Revolution, 60 million Russians were killed. That's a lot of people killed in a certain specific part of the world that just so happened to be where this empire was that they don't talk about. Isn't that kind of an oversight, you think? Like, I mean, so like you start to wonder, why are certain things not talked about?
Yeah,
because they don't.
Well, and isn't it interesting? You've got the communists on one side, you've got the secularists, United States government on the other side, and they both do their part in destroying history when they get opportunities to. The United States has done a lot in destroying. Just you look at those pictures from these world fairs in Chicago, Buffalo, New York, Philly, and then they're all torn down.
Right.
They're
Well,
all
they built. Well, I said it's funny. I mentioned this on one of these live streams, and I was saying that we're told that they were temporary structures, but they were only temporary because they tore them down afterwards. Like
Yeah.
your house would be temporary if you tore it down tomorrow, but you don't intend for it to be destroyed. It's like that's the thing. It's like so as somebody who's been in construction, like I said, my family has had a contracting business, like commercial construction. And then you'd have people who obviously have no idea about, they probably never done manual labor in their life. And they said, oh, those buildings were only built of plaster and wood and whatever else. And you're like, you see how big they are? They didn't fall down by themselves. Like, so they were built well enough to not, can you imagine what we're taught is that millions of people visit these world fairs, right? And they went through all these buildings, but they were just like these completely sloppy
Pop-up tents.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they were, oh, well, that was only plaster and, like
first rain, they melted.
Yeah. So then they decided to destroy them. So then they became temporary because they didn't keep them anywhere. And you're like, but they look way better than the stuff that they kept. So like, why wouldn't they, if they could just build them like that, why wouldn't they just keep them like that?
Yeah.
Because it's a lie. It's a stupid lie.
Yeah.
The fact that we just can't go forward, or can't recreate what was created in the past that was at top of its line it's all baffling. I mean, the mud flood, the Tartarian stuff, when we talked about that a couple weeks ago, you don't hear about any of that. And then, I joke all the time. Thank goodness for all these apps and everything else, because it has opened up and broadcast and put a big light on a lot of things. And I think it scares the government. It scares all of them to death. That's why they want to shut it down and everything, because we can't have power. We can't have knowledge. They control us that way. So,
well, yeah, they've clearly lied about things. And I think that's the craziest thing about the old world mud flood stuff is the fact, like I said, you guys, I don't care where you're at, you go look around and you'll see this stuff, and you'll see a building you've walked past like 1,000 times, and then you look at it, you're like, well, that is weird that like the first floor is like halfway under the ground.
Yes.
Like why did they build it like that? They didn't. Like nobody builds stuff like that. Isn't it funny? I was just talking to my brother today at lunch, and so I live in Virginia and I live on the coast. So Norfolk, Virginia, we just like my wife and I went out, and I was saying, so what we're taught. Well, we're taught. Just go look this up. So Norfolk, Virginia is supposedly 7 feet above sea level. It floods all the time during, we get hurricanes here, and usually not bad ones, but it's not uncommon for Norfolk to be flooded out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you walk down one of the main strips, like by the harbor, and like the streets here, and then you walk downstairs to go into this place. And I was like, explain to me why they would build basements in a place that floods all the time.
Exactly.
They wouldn't.
Everywhere.
And they never did. Like I said, it's so stupid that anyone thinks that they did, because like they weren't stupid when they were building these massive buildings. Why would they, obviously everybody knows that you don't do that kind of stuff. And it's just, and it was like, my brother was like, they used to build more basements back then. I was like, yeah, you think they were basements? Why did they all have windows that have dirt next to them?
Yeah. Because that's not up to code there. You're not egressing out of that.
No, but that's what I'm saying. But the crazy part is, it's not just buildings like that. Like you said, I've been mentioning this a lot lately, is that Easter Island. You guys know the Moai statues, like the weird like faces. Like, it wasn't that many years ago. They said, guess what? They have bodies.
Yes. It was like 10 years ago. They're like, oh, it's a 30-foot tall statue, by the way.
So so 20 feet of it's under the ground. And I said, I didn't get into this, but I was saying, like, so the book of Revelation, there's 7 churches that are mentioned specifically. You need to repent, or this judgment's coming. I'm coming soon. Well, go look up at the 7 churches. We did a podcast on this recently. You guys haven't followed me,
Yep.
check out a podcast I did with Alpha Talks. It was called "Has Judgment Day Already Came?" Those churches, those cities were literally 20 feet under the ground. And when they dug them up, there was destroyed columns, burned columns, melted stones, all under the ground. So like to find a church, you had to excavate. You had to dig stuff out. And that's the thing that people don't even realize. Like even like cities like Rome. You ever seen like really old pictures of Rome? It's covered in dirt and mud. Every place on the earth was basically covered in mud at some point. What happened? And like I said, I think to me, that's always like, if they don't write about that, doesn't that make you a little curious, like what they might be hiding? And like I said, it only makes sense that if it had nothing to do with Jesus, it had nothing to do with like something that was really exponentially important like that, why wouldn't they just tell us? There was a bad earthquake or something like that. It went all the way around the world. Oh, the sun did this. There was like, sunspots or something that did this. Solar flares and everything went crazy. They don't even try to explain it. They just say, well, that's quite a conspiracy theory. Like we always just built buildings with the street going like slanted up across the windows. That's the way we built it.
That's
whatever.
Makes perfect sense. Well, like like I've been an electrician for many years. You've been in construction. Nobody builds anything like that, especially a superstructure that some of these towns have. And like we were in a small town of like 3,000 this weekend, and I stopped by. Just the oldest building in town is this, was a mental health hospital in the late 1800s.
Was it a castle?
It was a castle. It's a huge castle, huge leveling stones on the outside. And of course, all the, like windows everywhere, blocked off at dirt level. So it's, and that's in a town of 3,000. So if you have questions, then just go to a town, especially if you're here in America, because a lot of these timelines make no sense. When you look at what the population was, we had callers call in saying that they dug 20 feet down and found perfect paved roads.
Right. Well, that's the thing that like you'll see this is kind of like this is a hidden in plain sight lie where you'll see this all the time. They're digging they're doing some kind of construction in Europe, and they said, "Oh, we discovered a Russian or a Roman bathhouse under the ground." Like underneath everything. And they said, like, you go to all these cities that we just take for granted. Oh, Atlanta has an underground. Oh, they have an underground section. Oh, interesting. What about Seattle and like Sacramento and all these places out west? Wait, so when did they have time to build a city under their city?
That's like with the Denver airport and the underground tunnels and everything. That's why all this is becoming so fascinating, because now you think about it, if there was this mudslide, all shit was already there. Just tunnel it up and wander in and out and get where you want to go, like your little mouse. I mean, it's
right.
It's also fascinating.
Well, that's a great example, and I guess I really haven't thought too much of it. Could have just been stuff that was nuked on the top and then was left below. But a great example of this, if you guys want to look this up, it's Cappadocia, Turkey. So Cappadocia, Turkey is, well, if you think about the book of Revelation, that the 7 churches are from Turkey, modern day Turkey, Asia is what it's called. Cappadocia is this place that has all these mountains. What it looks like is there was some kind of castles or something like that are completely melted like they were ice cream. And what's also Cappadocia has is this place underground, supposedly, that could fit 20,000 people.
Oh.
In the same place. And obviously, again, this is places where like biblical judgment was like said to come. Well, yeah, you're right. Like look at that place. Does anyone believe that the mountains just naturally look like they just carved out holes?
Yeah, that's
what does that look like?
I've been in Utah where some mountain ranges look like that. That's interesting.
Well, what's interesting is the day of the Lord is described as fiery judgment, that mountains are going to melt like wax. does that look like something that's, I mean, like to me, that looks like something that's been melted because I have eyeballs.
That's, yeah.
100%.
Well, you know, have you guys ever, have you followed or subscribed to John Levi's account on here?
Yes. Everyone yelled at us 2 weeks ago.
He talks a lot about that kind of stuff. And the thing that tripped me out the most is I think that before I came to some of these conclusions, I started to like to go hiking and, I think the older I've gotten, I wanted to get outdoors and just see stuff. And so I was fascinated with the western part of the United States. So I went out to Sedona. I've been out to outside of Las Vegas. And you go to Sedona and it's like all this red mountains and stuff like that look like they're like, I mean, it looks like buildings that were melted. That's all I can say. It looks like something that really bad happened there. And I think John found something that was something about like, it might've been outside somewhere in California, that it was a place very similar to Sedona. And he found remnants of bricks inside that. And that's what really tripped me out the most, was that in my mind, I thought this was a long time ago, something bad happened. But then you think bricks are red, and he found bricks, and it's something that looked just like that. And he actually found melted, like the one guy found melted glass, melted metal. And you're like, oh my goodness. If you really, I mean,
I got a clip here. I just, so people can sort of see what you're talking about.
The world,
we can mute it, but this is what you were talking about. All the red and white. See below is all bricks and mortar lines. Like this church. Yeah, there's the red bricks and mortar.
Well, isn't it funny too? Because it's kind of like
there you go. Red bricks that survived the melt.
Well, he actually found really real remnants of bricks. Like actually, I think they might even stamps on them. Yeah, like it was something that must have had an overhang, and they survived. I mean, I guess what he's shown is like that when bricks melt and it's like certain kinds of stones melt, I mean, it starts to look mountainous very quickly. I mean, so obviously the stuff that you see is kind of
just so crazy, like.
Well, so to me, the crazier part was, like I said, I'm thinking Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously the book of Genesis, like a long time ago. But then you're thinking like something like, because we're thinking, I'm sure like just like you guys, you think bricks, you're thinking like that's within the last couple hundred years. So when did bricks melt into like just clumps in a recent past? And like I said, it's funny because I've done a few videos recently about that show Fallout. And Fallout's like, some nuclear cataclysm happened 200 years ago or something like that, kind of set in the 1950s. And I started to really think about it. Like the funny part about this show is like, unironically, it's set in like the western part of the United States.
Yeah.
They don't have to dress anything up, do they?
No.
It looks just like something really bad happened there. And it's like, and what really tripped me out, of course, as somebody who would believe in like, Jesus came back, is there's a part, and if you guys have seen that show, they walk over to a place called, I think Shady Acres or something. They were some kind of settlement in California where they were going to repopulate it. The people in the bunkers believed they were going to one day come up and repopulate the earth. And then she realized they had already done that. And she's like, oh, we missed it. And it went real bad. And it's like, is that what they're trying to tell us? And I think, yeah, because I think the whole show's about her being lied to about what had happened before, what happened afterward, what happened while she was down there. And yeah, to me, it's like, there's so many shows about this post-apocalyptic world, and you're like, we live in it.
Yeah,
we live in it. And if you're willing to look around and see it, that's why the technology we've had in the past like 150 years. Oh wow, we've advanced so rapidly. What if they already had some of this stuff and they just were slowly releasing it? Because if you think about all of human history, go back to the times of like the Greeks and the Romans. They had great buildings. They had great food. I mean, this is what we're taught anyways.
Yeah.
They had great buildings. They had great food. They lived in nice locations. Okay. When you go on vacation, what do you look for?
Great food.
All those things.
Yeah.
And so what we're taught is the only thing they didn't have was like certain technology to make life easier. They had everything else.
Yeah, they could cut a 65-foot piece of stone and move it into place
Right.
that weighs 50 tons.
But I'm starting to think like, you know, I said this earlier about Hollywood and everything and how they sprinkle certain stuff in. Maybe this is their way of showing and telling without saying, because they know the government or whatever the powers that may be don't want to come out and say it because they don't want to. It's all about, oh, it was me, us, we created. But I feel like it just seems like with the Fallout show, and the video game, and just certain things, it's like, here's you just a little bit of nibble, like, and like we said, they're not creative. They didn't just come up with this on a whim.
Mhm.
So it's being laid out in front of us, just in a different way, without someone broadcasting it out loud, so they could be like, oh, we know that there were frauds and fakes from the beginning. I don't know. I mean, I could be way off, but it's starting to feel like more and more stuff that's getting released and brought out there. There is a whole lot of, man, 10 years ago, we would have been called the crazy people and been locked up, and and now look at it. Like that's all we could talk about. It's all you want to show us and everything. So it's really interesting.
Well, I think that, to me, it's an example of that we've been taught, once again, lies is about like mythology. So what we're taught as mythologies were just made up stories. When to the Greeks, that's not what they believe mythologies were. They were stories. They were at least based on true things, and they were meant to teach you things. So what kind of mythologies we have now? Movies, comic books, stuff like that. So I mean, like, these stories that can continue to be recycled. And the funny thing about, like I said, about like Hollywood being unoriginal, there's like certain types of stories that are just that, like, the characters change and like the environments change, but it's still the same story. We have these archetypes of stories. They come from a true story. Doesn't mean the movies are facts. It just means that they're based on the truth. And so when you start to see it, it's just like I said, are you to believe that people who write art don't put their belief systems into the movies or the arts that they write? It's kind of like, if you have something you believe, and obviously this is what artists do, is that, like, if it was me, obviously I want to plant seeds in people and I want to kind of influence them a certain way. Like, why would you think that they wouldn't try to do that? It's almost like that. Like, do you think the devil is not good enough to do that too? He's like thinking like, oh, I wish I'd have thought of that. I wish I'd thought of trying to make like movies like The Avengers about me and glorifying me if I know what I'm doing. And it's like, that was a good idea. I should have thought of that. Now, that's
what they just say. The devil's the Lord of the Air. I think that's
the Prince of the Power of the Air. Yeah. So obviously, like the through the airwaves or through
internet,
the electronics,
TV.
Is he trying to influence people? And it's like, I mean, obviously, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So of course the enemy would use those kind of things to influence us. But I mean, like, again, they're hints of truth. And I mean, obviously, with all humility, we're trying to piece these things together. I mean, is Fallout really about the mud flood? I don't know. I mean, it makes sense that it is. It makes sense that if they don't tell you about it in the history books, maybe they would tell you a different way. Because it's like, and I think that sometimes you wonder, like, why certain movies really resonate with us, like The Matrix.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what we live. Like, that's what people think, because you're like, because we instinctively know. It's like the story, like when Morpheus is telling Neo, like, you've known it all your life. You could never kind of really like describe exactly what it was. This kind of false reality we live in. And it's like, yeah, because we've been lied to about everything. I don't believe we live in a computer, but I do believe that we've been taught since we were kids a false version of history, and we've been put together as cogs in this big, horrible machine. And then the ones of us have woke up, I want to get out. And then the ones who you're trying to tell about that, just like Morpheus said, they will fight you to stay in the system. They will fight you to stay asleep as you try to wake them up. And yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, that makes perfect sense if the Bible's true, because I mean, and I believe it is.
Well, it backfires. I feel like on these evil spirits as well, because we never meet people like you, like Chris, like all these other people we've interviewed. It's a beautiful thing to come across these communities that are all putting in work in one area of a truth finding, and there's other groups looking in other areas, and that's sort of the joy of having someone like you on, JT, is all the work you've put into it, and give people an idea to stretch your mind a little bit. Maybe you'll see the world in a completely different light. It did. I mean, this thing's crazy. Like, I'm still feel like I'm just getting hit by all the.
Well, you know what? You say like that this is the interesting part about like the little season. I think this is why so many people who try to debunk it, or like most people don't even try, I think, at this point, because I think if like, especially like probably guys like you guys have a podcast, you take little parts of different conspiracies and you talk about all of them. And I think I'm just like you guys, that I started to go down these things, and then you find something that actually like click, 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 they all go together, and you're like, no,
Yeah.
like like it's almost like it is a bit overload, because I mean, like, that's what I'm saying, like that I had done a lot of research in conspiracies, and then people said you need to look into the mud flood, and I'm like, well, that's weird, but why does it matter? Like, why would they lie?
Right.
And then you're like, wow, because the timeline makes sense to the time we're in now, where they've lied about everything. So now all the lies make sense in this certain sort of way together. And then you're like, now I know why they lie about all the things. Because, at the end of the day, like, whether we're right or we're wrong about this, I do believe that like the UFO phenomenon, for one thing, like, not to get too far off on another tangent at the end, but the fact that the government's willing to admit there's UFOs now in order to say that spiritual things don't exist. It's almost like the one thing they don't want you to ever lean into is the fact that Jesus is real, the Bible's true. That's the one thing you can believe anything else you want in this world. Whatever, like, believe you're like a cat, and they'll put out a litter box in your school.
But well covered here at Phantom Facts. Well covered here.
But say that the Bible's true, and they'll be like, we got a loon over here. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Thinks that book's real?
So
what do you need to know other than the fact that that's the one unacceptable thing? So obviously, I think the proof is going to be in the pudding here soon. Is like that the more we talk about this particular topic, is the soon we're going to be in fact checked. The little season is an antiquated theory. It's been debunked by people with blue hair on Facebook. Like, that'll be next.
Well, and that's the beauty of the internet and of the podcast and its original format is once we put it out there, it's out there forever. A matter of finding it, and all these things, man, they're fascinating. This short season, this little season, it makes so much more sense with everything else when you're seeing with these buildings and the destruction in certain areas. It's been fascinating for people who want to follow you. You're on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Are you on Twitter too?
I'm on Twitter. I've tried to do a little bit. It's funny, like, I'm just one guy, so I try to cross pollinate all the apps, but like I don't tweet as much. I typically just kind of promote the podcast, and every now and then I post reels. But I mean, like, yeah, like if you like the short stuff, like, I'm on TikTok and I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. But I mean, like, my passion is more toward the long form stuff. So like I have a podcast, and I'm on, JT follows JC on everything. So you can follow me on YouTube. It's kind of where I post most of my stuff. And then the stuff that's a little spicy, I might post over on Rumble. So I got an account on Rumble. I have a, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all that stuff. I also have a movie called Ancient Angels. Yep. If you guys are interested in basically a biblical view of the ancient alien stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we did a pod. Yeah, we did. Well, it's funny. We talked more about that, and the little season stuff kind of said, oh, well, this is we've talked less about Nephilim now, and it's more like like the stuff that, well, I mean, it's funny because like this stuff about ancient
gotta build a base.
Well, it's more like thousands of years ago, And
Yeah.
so like the stuff that happened a couple hundred years ago seems like obviously that's much more relevant. Though it's interesting though about some of the old world buildings, they got like 20-foot doors and weird stuff like that. It does seem like
Giants.
that maybe
It's fascinating.
maybe giants are more recent than we ever thought they were. So I mean,
Yeah.
so that, I guess the thing is, question everything. Obviously, do your own research. Like, I mean, please, I said, I feel like this is a on all hands on deck situation. Don't rely on any one person. Do your own research, like specifically in your own town. That's the only before they destroy all those buildings that you wonder about. But yeah, guys. I appreciate you guys having me on. This was a blast, and obviously, let's do it again sometime.
JT, we're
we definitely will.
Yeah, we're very grateful for you coming on our show. We appreciate all the people that follow JT, putting up with our questions with him, and give us a follow, Phantom Facts, and check out your movie, Ancient
Angels.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I want to say aliens.
I know. I've made the mistake too. So.
Ancient Angels by JT follows JC. Thank you so much for coming on the show, JT.
No problem.
Thanks, JT.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll finish it off with the Kiffness in the Mayan.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. This is our home test. If exposed, remove
Thanks, JT, man. I appreciate that. That was a great show.
That was good. I was, you know, I wish I would have known to ask. You guys should have played the Alex Jones song. You played that?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That cracked me up. I was like, that was.
I love that.
I didn't want to push it. Last time with Chris, we pushed it. We had balls glued to my butthole or something like that. We got a few comments on that one, so we were like, keep it clean. 3 Dog Night, can't go wrong with that, right?
That was good, man. No, it was fun, guys. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think I pretty much had like 250-ish 100 people in like on my side of the chat. The whole time.
Did you? Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, I love these interviews, talking to you, different people, you know, that have been doing research on this. I just think you can do it so much better than me spending 20 hours in a week trying to research everything. Like, I feel, you know, I want someone who's got the passion that's, you know, been going on for years to talk about this, because I'm not going to convince anyone off of 20 hours, you know?
No, I mean, you know, I would say that I would just encourage you guys to keep looking, because I think that like a lot of us who, especially guys who are like really biblical based like accounts, we tried to debunk some of this stuff and then like we couldn't, and then it's like you kind of left with like, what do I do with this other than like, what if it's true? And then once you start to accept that it could be true, then you're like, this makes way more sense than the stuff we were talking about before.
When he said it, and I think Chris can attest to it, when he said it, Chris said it a couple weeks ago. Like, it hit me in the middle of the show. I'm just like, that makes so much more sense, you know, because JWs have they struggle with their theology on the generation. They call it the next generation prophecy, and like they have changed it 5 or 6 times in a matter of 100 years of how to explain what this generation means when Jesus was talking on the Mount of Olives, because they always said,
right. Well, you know, I think that's the thing where I think that really, and I think that's why it's almost comical when people call us heretics, because we're like, okay, so I believe what Jesus said, then I'm bad. Okay, so if I can't explain all the things he said, but I just believe that it was true, then, I mean, because I think that's the thing that the conspiracy stuff has allowed me to just say, I don't care what the history books say.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I think that as we weren't that long ago, like, especially like looking in like biblical earth or different things like that, or like even dinosaur stuff. And I'm like, I don't care what the science books say. Like, I already know Dr. Fauci lies. Like, I don't really care what science says. Like, prove it to me. Okay, so you can't prove it to me, so I don't believe it. So now I'm like, well, obviously they tell us history was written by the winners. Okay, so you're already telling us that history was false. Okay,
yes.
So I can't really rely on that. All right, well then obviously I'm just stuck with what Jesus said, and I said I'll do my own research on what's true.
Well, and what responsibility do these churches have for covering up? You know, and the more we talk about it and I research it, you know, I do believe that like the millennial reign already happened. And that just makes those churches so much more. And I'm not talking like some of these newer ones. I'm talking like, the Catholic, the Orthodoxy, these churches
Well,
that
I
have
mean,
just held a reign over people for thousands of years,
well, I
promoting.
think that that's the thing, and if you really think about it, like, so that what we're famously taught about the Catholics is that they were literally burning Christians who like, like translated the Bible into the common
Yep,
tongue of the people.
yep.
Maybe they didn't want them to know what happened before, and then you hear like, have you ever heard that the Vatican vaults, the library, they said there's like 58 miles worth of like aisles of books. 58 miles. Can you imagine what's in there? So obviously there's people who are not good who know the things that we're saying. I mean, there's people who obviously know the things that happened before.
Well, and I was listening to your podcast. And I think it was your last one you had. Maybe not, but you were talking about how when they went into Iraq and Afghanistan and those museums were raided,
Yeah.
and they were raided with like surgical precision. They weren't just like, a Black Lives Matter rally raid where there's smash and grab. It was like they knew which ones were authentic pieces. They knew which ones were fake. They took the ones that were, like stuff like that. Or like, even when when the Taliban took over Afghanistan and started blowing up those huge statues built into the side of the
Why would they
mountains.
care about doing that?
Exactly.
Well,
yeah,
well,
exactly.
yeah. I think in Baghdad, I think the museum, I want to say it was a very high ranking, like I think general or something like that. He literally went on the news and said the people who did this knew what they were looking for. It was like I think he almost even said it was an inside job.
Find that clip because that'd be a gold clip
Yeah,
to
yeah,
find.
you can look that. I'm pretty sure. Well, that's what they said. Like, so in all like the history of warfare, what you would always do is go destroy the other army.
Yes. Yep.
First. You wouldn't try to take the capital. You would go destroy the army first. So what they did was the opposite of what would be tactically smart, and it just so happened to lead to the looting of historical artifacts. Huh? That's weird.
Well, and the British were doing it before us, and like that Rothschild thing. Like I get the Amun Ra and all that stuff, and I think it may be a little bit out there, but like the Rothschilds come from the Tartaria, region. Like their family comes from that Eastern European side of the country,
Well, they
and so
also what was it? Have you ever heard like there's a book called The Illuminati by Jim Marrs. You ever? You should guys. That's a pretty good audio book. If you guys get bored, look that up. I think it's about a 14 or 15 hour.
What is it?
It was called The Illuminati by Jim Marrs.
I'll look it up.
And there's a part in the book that actually says that the Bushes and also the Rothschilds both claim lineage to the Rothschilds claim lineage to Nimrod, and
really,
yeah, and the Bushes were in this kind of thing called the Sons of Marduk, and they believe they're related to Marduk, who is Zeus, and Zeus in the Bible is Satan. So basically, they're saying like they're sons of the devil.
Well, and we,
which I believe.
I left the JWs when I was 22, and I was very heavy into it. Worked up in their headquarters up in New York, and they always talked about the ancient Canaanite gods. So when I left, I sort of just did a whole like throw the Bible away and pretend none of it was true for a few years. And I'm just living life, and I come across in 2012 a documentary by Alex going to Bohemia Grove.
Yeah.
where they worship Molech.
That's
and
weird, huh?
I'm sitting there thinking like, what is this Canaanite god? Like, why? I thought this was taken care of like 4,000 years ago. Like they stopped worshiping these type of gods, and
there's nothing new under the sun.
No, nothing new under the sun. And so then that reopened everything for me, really, because it's like there's definitely this battle between good and evil going on. It's I don't know what to make of it, but it's not as it appears.
Well, I appreciate you guys obviously looking into it and have guys like me on, because I think that, if anything, I've looked into a lot of rabbit holes, and I said they all kind of confirm what I already believed, and maybe that could be confirmation bias, but I don't believe it is. I think that to me, it's like that's what more people believe, and it's funny, even like channels like My Lunch Break just did a video about the little season, because I think most people are like, just thinking like there's that podcast Blurry Creatures and stuff like that. It's enough to say, oh, this weird thing happened. Oh, this paranormal thing happened. Okay, well, I mean, how many ghost stories do you hear before you say, like, well, what does it mean?
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
that's the same thing where it's like, how many times can you say, look at this old building? And it's like, okay, look at the mud. All right. But what does it mean? And if it doesn't mean anything, then it's like, it's obviously, again, it's you just put it aside. But if it means something, well, then there's a reason to keep digging. I think obviously you guys are on the right trail though. So
Well, we started off with like the good old Aleister Crowley and sex magic, and it just went down. We've done a bunch of stuff on the Bushes. Their whole family line is fascinating, and
they're all related to
like,
Dracula, just like King Charles.
Yeah.
yeah, all of the American presidents are except for two. Except for two.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like
That's a coincidence, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe was meant to be like that.
Well, the whole blue, the royal families, these monarchies, and it was really bad in the 1800s. Was this blue blood line, where they believed they came from the same descendant tree as Jesus, or from King David, from the lineage.
Well, what's interesting about that too, if you think about it, like with this mindset, maybe that they can trace their lines back to those people because their descendants did not die whatever happened a couple hundred years ago. Because if you really think about it, like that, most people could not trace their bloodlines back very far. I mean, just do the math. I was, you bring it up all the time. Read your Bible. Solomon had 1,000, like between wives and concubines, he had 1,000. So being related to Solomon is probably actually not all that special, like genetically speaking. So if you're related to Solomon, you're related to King David. But if a bunch of people got wiped out, maybe that's why that certain people could trace their lines back to him and certain people could not.
Well, and maybe that's what gives them their false sense of gravitas that they are.
Definitely. Well, I think ultimately that's why like the people like the Rothschilds point back to Nimrod, because I do believe he was a Nephilim. He was partially divine.
Well,
the way they would view it. So therefore, if he was partially divine, they are partially divine because that's why they have blue blood, and that's why they can rule, and you and I could not. And no matter how much money you and I accumulated, we would still never be able to be in their club because we would be new money, not old money.
And even that's why Trump was allowed to go to Buckingham Palace, because he still is of that family line.
Yeah, he's the guy. That's why we say, like, even like I said, whether I'll vote for him or not, you don't become as famous as him. You don't become as successful as him in New York and Hollywood without playing ball. Now, does he still play ball? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's like kind of everybody's best guess. Probably to a certain extent, maybe not to the extent.
I feel like he turned it off a little bit because he knew where we were headed. I don't know. Yeah,
I think every now and then these guys, people kind of grow a conscience, maybe like a little bit.
It's just the Trump thing is interesting just because it's like 4 years, like
it sure was better. It sure was better than the last 4.
Yeah, but it's just like you're gonna get in there. 3 of it's gonna be spent washing all the crap that just happened away. You're gonna set up the basement layer of something great, and then the way this is working right now, it's just gonna go back and forth. It's just gonna get a tear down, a tear out, tear. Like, unless we could go on a solid run for 12 years or so of like not the same mindset, but keep it in the ballpark so you could put America back on top here. Like, I'd be okay with it. But if we're just going to put in for 4 years and then some Joe Biden or Kamala Harris 2.0 comes in there and just washes it all. Yeah. Gavin Newsom, whoever you want.
She'd be like George
I'm just
W. Bush
like
2.0.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it would, it's like, here we go again.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, Trump's making a lot of acquisitions to the military-industrial complex, to big pharma. He has to get any coverage.
Yeah.
He has to make some sort of deals with these people. It's better than Biden, though. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You go to the grocery store and you're like, how much more do you want to say? Like, like I said, actually, the only reason I said I wouldn't vote again, this is before I kind of really woke up. because I said I'm not voting for the Republicans who stuck a knife in his back because I mean I believe I was one of those people like right away the election was stolen.
Yep.
I said I don't believe it, and I said I don't believe all that Q crap. That I said he didn't need all the secret stuff to get back in the White House. Is like all he needed was the Republican Congresses in those states to fight for him, and then maybe he could have won. And that's why I was like I'm not voting for another Republican. So then when he's back on the ballot, I'm like, well, I did say that I wasn't going to vote because of that. And also, like I said, because of this conviction thing, I'm like, all right, now I do kind of want to just say,
yeah,
fine. You know, like I wouldn't vote now, and I'd be surprised if this election's not stolen again. But it doesn't mean I won't just cast my ballot just to say, you had me on the sideline, but the way you guys are just like treating this place like a banana republic. Fine.
And I think that's what a lot of people are like, is like, oh man, I haven't voted in so long, but man, I am this close to living under the bridge or not being able to feed my family. Like I have to get out there, and even if it gets stolen, I have to consciously that I am doing something greater. And if that's casting this little vote, I'm gonna do it. Like, it'll be interesting to see if any of that true data comes out.
If we get an election,
right?
You know,
that's the other part of it. Yes,
you laugh about it, but Ukraine is now, you know, Zelensky hasn't been an elected official now for like 3 months because he's postponed the elections due to wartime, and then the extension for that fell off. So now he's like considered an illegal president.
Well, you know, the president they sent back in the pandemic was like, oh well, if we announce an emergency, therefore we got all these extra powers. It's like, well, that seems like not checks and balances, because if you guys get to declare the emergency, well, I won't. What if you just did that whenever you felt like it?
When I was living in Colorado at the time, and you know, like there's restaurants, little mom and pop restaurants that try to stay open, and it was the governor's decree. Like he had to do a decree to shut down this restaurant, pull their license, yank everything out from under them. And I'm like, what are we living in? Is this like Prince John? Like,
right.
That's what it, And where were the churches? Where were the churches?
Well,
time.
And I think that is, to the broader point of the whole thing is the fact that these 501(c) churches who are kind of beholden to these governments, they did nothing, and they declared themselves unessential. And you know what? I agree that most of them were. I mean, if you're not going to stand up right now, when like what else? If we're dealing with life and death, and like you're the people who try to lead people to life.
No.
Well, if you say you're not essential and you can just watch it from TV, well, guess what? Like, I can watch somebody better than the guy who is down the street. The only reason I went to your church is because it was close. So now if I can listen to anybody, then you finally start to listen to other people, and they're like, well, this person's actually talking about the pandemic, and they're a Christian, and they're talking about the things that are going on in the world, not just saying, throw your money in the plate and then can live your best life now. Anybody says that, you hear that anywhere.
Well, and it was.
So I think that's the real difference, is the fact that God uses all these things together for our good. Is that because you didn't go to a church, you read your Bible in your own room, and you're like, I never heard this in church. And then you said, I don't need to go there anymore. And God was like, you don't.
Yeah. Well, and that's like what we said at the beginning of the show, just like 2020 it backfired. I think backfired on them way more than they thought. I don't think they realized the repercussions, that I think they thought we were all just going to sit there and play video games. And
well, I mean, I guess if you think about this, it's still a numbers game. A lot of people did, so like, I think that sometimes I'm sure like guys like me, sometimes we realize that we can be tunnel vision to say everyone's like this, but then you still see people wearing masks now.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, what? Like, you guys don't know it's a scam now? I saw a funny TikTok the other day, and it was like, they were saying, hey, we got this new game show. It's called The Last Mask Standing. And it was like, interview stuff first. Did you see that? And it was like, you might have a chance to win. Are you going to wear the mask forever? And it was like, but it's it's stupid, but it's like, yeah, the people are still wearing masks, driving around in their cars, and you're like,
I mean, I saw one the other day in Tennessee here. He was on a motorcycle. On a motorcycle. What are you doing?
The bird flu. That bird
Yeah,
flu's coming hot, man.
yes.
That's,
he didn't want to swallow one of those locusts that are coming out of the
Yeah, that's true.
No.
I told my chickens to hang on tight where you won't die from this bird flu. Since the government's taking out chicken coops and
don't get any shots.
Yeah.
Chickens.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think that's the thing. Is like, so there, people like us, like we realize how much of a farce it all is. But then there's some people are just saying, or some people are like, they're awake, right? They think that they're awake. But then the next news thing that everyone goes along with, they're right along with that. And they're like,
no.
wait, so you think they lied about, the pandemic, the election, Ukraine, but then this war in Israel is totally legit. All this stuff is true. All this other stuff is totally true. And you're like, gosh, you really have to like think a little bit past what you already think you believe. Like when they start to tell you something, like actually question it even more. Like maybe I'm like, once everybody starts to think the same thing you're thinking, like it's time to like, there's your 4D chess, right? Like don't be thinking Trump's playing it. You should start playing it. Like think about how past the obvious thing. Think about what they want you to do with what the news says.
And I think like, it's nice to see that there's a community, I guess, dedicated to it,
Well,
because like
it's growing. I do believe it's growing.
Yeah.
I do think there's so many people are, and I think that's why I was saying that when you start to see the labels being put on our videos, then you'll know like it's facts.
Well, and I love these people calling in too, like I think that's, because I think people are starting to see it in their own little towns, and to get that sort of affirmation, it's nice to.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Yeah. And I love the fact that it's all age ranges too, right? Like it's, so like that just tells you that like, you wouldn't think that older generation would open up and because you like, well, fucking, I'm already, I've already been doing this for so long. Might as well just keep the blinders on. But more and more people from, 90 to 16, for crying out loud, everyone is starting to be like, holy moly. And that's what we can only hope for is that younger generation will kind of, keep them open, I guess, and not go back into tunnel vision and buy into it. And then it just, like I always said, Corey, just the circle just keeps. So
We'll see when they try to declare World War III on us. We'll see how everyone does.
Yeah.
Very true.
Well, anyways, guys, I got to run, but I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, appreciate you too, JT.
You guys
Thanks
in the
so much.
chat still. Love you guys. God bless you. And yeah, hopefully, guys, we can do this again.
Yep, same here. Have a good one.
Amen. Take it easy.
All right, buddy.
Were we live?
He was still alive. Yeah, we went off.
I was
He was
still
getting
live.
that behind the scenes footage.